Hello, Psych 101 students. Welcome to Module 6, Chapter 12, Learning Objective 3. In this learning objective, we will look at how do your attitudes affect you. Okay, so first of all, let me talk about the difference between a belief and an attitude. A belief is a cognition or a thought. Like, example is, I believe that dogs have 4 legs. An attitude, on the other hand, is a belief that also includes an emotional component. That is, you feel positive or negative towards something or someone. So it's an evaluation. Um, Example would be I really love dogs. Um, Attitudes come in 2 different types. You could have a simple attitude where your behavior is consistent with your attitude, or you could have a complex attitude where your behavior is not consistent with your attitude. So, for example, if you believe that smoking is bad for you and you also don't ever smoke, that would be considered a simple attitude. Your behavior follows your um, your behavior follows your attitude. Uh, let's say that on the other hand, you believe that and you know that smoking is bad for you, but you also smoke. That would be a complex attitude where there's a disconnect between your cognition, your thought, or your belief, and your actual behavior. Uh, Attitudes can predict behavior, and how likely they are to predict behavior depends on the strength of the attitude, its personal relevance to you, and what's called attitude accessibility. In general, the stronger and more personally relevant an attitude is, the more likely it is to predict behavior. Attitude accessibility is the ease or difficulty of retrieving an attitude from memory. So attitudes that are more firmly held and stable over time tend to be highly accessible, meaning that they come to mind easily. Somebody asks your attitude about a certain topic and you know your answer right away. That would be an accessible attitude. Um, on the other hand, sometimes somebody may ask you a question and you have how do you feel about, I don't know, whatever. Do you I don't do you like pizza or pasta better? Like if you have to really think about it, those add to that would be considered a less accessible attitude, meaning that it's it's less it would have less strength and it would be less relevant to you. Attitudes that are highly accessible that are much more likely to influence your behavior. um, okay, let's go. Attitudes develop in 3 ways. First of all, we have the mere exposure effect, which is the increase in liking due to repeated exposure. So just simply being exposed to something more often tends to make us like it more. For instance, foods. If you know foods that you are more familiar with, that you've been exposed to a lot, you tend to like more than foods that you have very little experience with. Think about going on vacation somewhere and they have some kind of food that you normally never consider. You normally it normally is never part of your diet, or it's maybe some kind of exotic fruit or something, and often we'll be very hesitant at first and cautious about whether or not we want to try it and or order it. But what you'll find is that as time goes on in that vacation and you get exposed to that food that's part of that culture more and more. By the end of your week or two vacation, you may be loving that food. Um, because it took repeated exposure for you to finally decide that you like it. Uh, in the example shown here, people tend to prefer their mirror image compared to their photographic image. And because they are reversed. So and it's because you see yourself much more. You see your mirror image typically much more than you see yourself in photographs. And because we see ourselves every day in the mirror, we get familiar with it, and because of the mirror exposure effect, we tend to like that side of our face or that configuration of our face, more than how our face looks in a photograph. Okay. Um, second, the second type of way that we develop attitudes is through learning. Because our associations between things and their meanings can change, our attitudes can be conditioned. And then advertisers certainly um, take advantage of this and use classical conditioning to help change attitudes. If you have positive feelings towards a celebrity, for instance, and that celebrity gets paired with a certain product over and over, then you may transfer that positive feeling to the product that's been paired with the celebrity. And this effect usually translates into greater sales for the product. This is why advertisers use famous celebrities and to um, in conjunction with their products in advertisements or commercials or whatnot. It's just a classical conditioning mechanism. The two get paired together, and your feelings about one of them, the person that you like a lot, gets transferred to the product, and you tend to like the product more. Operant conditioning also is at play in the formation of attitudes. Um, if let's say while growing up, every time you demonstrate a certain attitude, you receive praise for it. Well, that's a reinforcement, and so you're more likely to um, strengthen that attitude over time because of the reinforcement you're receiving. If you receive punishment for it, so you display some kind of attitude, and your parents say, "Oh, that's a horrible attitude to have," and they have harsh words for you, then that would be a punishment, and you would be less likely to keep or to strengthen that attitude over time. You may actually change your attitude to something else. So, anyways, there are different forms of learning, including classical and operant conditioning at work in the development of attitudes. And we also have socialization as the third way that attitudes develop. So attitudes are shaped through socialization, and this is from caregivers, peers, teachers, religious leaders, politicians, and media figures, and they can guide our attitudes about many things. And this is through observational learning, or much of this is through observational learning. We often adopt attitudes of others whom we look up to or admire. It might be a parent or a favorite teacher or I don't know, some kind of influencer or somebody on TV, and you find out that they have a certain attitude, and that attitude may become yours. Um, okay, so a lot of our attitudes are initially developed through socialization, through what our parents, had to through copying attitudes our parents had, or siblings, or teachers, or things like that. Um, Attitudes can be either explicit or implicit. An explicit attitude is one that we're consciously aware of and can report. Um, an implicit attitude is an attitude that influences a person's feelings and behavior at an unconscious level. And these attitudes often revealed indirectly through our behaviors. So like it's an attitude that we're not even necessarily aware of, or it could be an attitude that we actually even deny, but it might be there on an unconscious level. The implicit association test, the IAT, it's a test that it tests for implicit or unconscious attitudes or biases that a person may have. Um, it measures how quickly a person associates concepts or objects with positive or negative words. So I've included an example, and this is a race preference example that has been that this test has been used a lot to look at people's unconscious biases concerning race. Um, this is just one example of the implicit association test. Like you can measure things like attitudes towards gender or towards I don't know sexuality, or actually anything. You attitudes towards different types of foods, or I mean this is the way this test works. Is you can really like look for any kind of unconscious attitudes. It might be between I don't know disabled versus non-disabled individuals, for instance. Okay, anyways, um, let me go through it real quick here. There's this is once again this is the race preference example. So pictures of black or white individuals and words representing good or bad evaluative attributes are flashed in the center of the screen, and subjects quickly classify these as whether they belong with category pairs shown in the upper left or the upper right using two screens on their keyboard. So that's in the first um, set of tests. It might be the conditions in the top two screens there. So I've got my finger on my left hand on one key, my finger on the right hand on another key, and so you can see like if and this one is from a medical example. It doesn't have to say patient, but let's say so. I'm told if it's a black face or it's a negative or bad word, I push the button on the left. If it's a white face or a good word or a positive word, I push the button on the right. And then so sometimes, a black face will appear or a white face or a positive word or a negative word. And so in this first example, listed A, I would push the button on the left because it's a black face. And when I see the word pleasure, I think, oh, that's a good word. I push the button on the right. Okay. Um, a second set of you would do a second set of trials where they change the pairings, and these are shown in the bottom two pictures. So in this case, I've got my two fingers, and if I see a white face or a negative or bad word, I push the left button. If I see a black face or a good or positive word, I push the right button. And so in the example C, I would push the right button, and I see the word pleasure, I'd push the right button. Anyways, um, the speed to associate the black plus bad and the white plus good screens, A and B, relative to the opposite pairing of black plus good, and white plus bad, C and D, constitutes the IAT score, interpreted to be a measure of implicit race preference. And the what typically would happen with, at least among white people, is that they will be faster in responding in the first conditions, the A and B screens, compared to the second conditions. And this is because if I was to have any kind of unconscious bias towards black people, then there would be kind of a match between seeing a black face or seeing a negative word. In my mind, if I have a negative bias, then it's kind of like there's a match between negative words and black faces, and there would be a match between seeing white faces and positive words or good words. And so I'll be quicker. This makes this makes the task easier. People tend to respond faster. In the bottom condition, it's more if you have once again if you have some kind of unconscious bias, then it would be a mismatch condition where you know the pairing white faces with negative words and black faces with good words. Well, I mean, if that's not how if my mind doesn't organize things that way, if my mind kind of pairs negative associations with black faces, then this would be a mismatch condition, and it would take me, milliseconds longer. It's not like you in either condition, these decisions happen in less than a second. Typically, like you can be really quick, but it's a you do a bunch of trials, and you'll often find that there's there's a noticeable difference in being just slightly faster in the first condition. And the difference between the two is you kind of shows the amount of unconscious bias you may have. Um, Black people tend to be, when they do this test, they tend to be more equal between the two conditions in their times, um, whereas white people tend to um, be slower in the second condition. Um, and so this is the way the test works, and it's an interesting kind of test. You can find examples online. Look up implicit association test. There's actually a couple of sites where you can do this test yourself. Uh, and just for the final note, as mentioned here, the IAT may lack validity, and its use has become somewhat controversial. Remember, validity is it measuring what it's supposed to be? Is it accurately measuring it? And so, some people say it's not really a measure of unconscious bias or unconscious racism. Like that, it may be a different reason why people get a difference in their times. Um, Anyways, so there is some controversy around it, and that's the implicit association test. Okay, cognitive dissonance. It's an uncomfortable mental state due to a contradiction either between two attitudes or between an attitude and a behavior. So, let's say I'm someone that preaches to others about the dangers of smoking, or maybe I even do it in a job. Like maybe I work at a health facility, and I'm part of my job is to encourage patients to not smoke or to cut down their smoking or to quit. And then let's say I occasionally smoke myself and have cigarettes, then that would create cognitive dissonance. And it's like, it's like on the one hand, I believe this, that smoking is dangerous and that you shouldn't do it. And on the other hand, I'm actually doing the behavior. Well, that's an inconsistency. And we don't like, our brains don't like inconsistencies. Um, that is what cognitive dissonance is in the brain. And it creates an unconscious mental state. I'm sorry, it meant uncomfortable mental state. Let's continue with it. So according to this is Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs when there is a contradiction once again, between two attitudes or between an attitude and behavior. And one of the basic assumptions of cognitive dissonance theory is that the dissonance causes anxiety and tension. Um, and and so we're typically motivated to try to reduce or eliminate this anxiety or tension um, that's occurring in our minds. And one of the ways that we can reduce it is by changing our attitudes somewhat. So because we can't necessarily change our past behaviors. So I don't know. I'll just give you an example. Let's say you grow up in a religious household, and you've been taught um, that any kind of uh, any kind of homosexual kinds of acts are against God, and they're really nasty and they can cause you to go to hell or whatever. I mean, you've been, you've kind of grown up with this and it's part of who you are, and it's like, yeah, you should never sleep with the same sex or we're not. And you go to college and during some crazy party where maybe there's alcohol and drugs and whatnot, you end up having a same sex experience. And this is a prime example of something that would cause a lot of cognitive dissonance. I believed this one thing my whole life, and it's what what my attitude is, what I've been taught to believe, and yet I actually went against it in my behavior. Well, here's the thing: you can't change your behaviors if they've already happened. I mean, you could say, "Oh, I'll never do it again," but the behavior's already happened. So, what would typically happen in that case, because we're motivated to reduce that tension, you're gonna be feeling like, "How could I do this? This is crazy." Like, then this person would tend to have an attitude shift. It doesn't mean like they will completely disregard what their attitude was, but it will shift in a more positive direction. They'll be like, well, maybe it's like not so bad, and this is the nature of cognitive dissonance. When we do a behavior that goes against our attitudes, we tend to shift our attitudes to make that behavior, less contradictory. Maybe it's okay to do it occasionally or whatnot. Okay. Um, I want to mention that I've included a video that follows this one. You can see Philip Zimbardo. He's a kind of a famous social psychologist. He discusses cognitive dissonance. So make sure you take a look at that. Um, Another type of cognitive dissonance is post-decisional dissonance. And so this is where cognitive dissonance arises when we have positive attitudes about different options, but must choose one option. And so after making a tough decision between equally appealing alternatives, like maybe I'm car shopping or I'm house shopping or something like that, and I gotta choose, there's a number of them that I like. Well, what we tend to do is after we've made our decision and we've chosen one, we'll tend to focus on the positive aspects of the choice that we made, and we'll think about the negative aspects of the choices that we didn't make. And this makes us feel better about our choice. Once again, we're motivated to reduce or eliminate dissonance, the mental tension. Like, you don't want to be always like worrying, oh, did I make the right choices? And so we actually try to lessen the that that anxiety about did I make the right choice by saying, oh yeah, this is why I chose this house. It's got such a great backyard, and the other one had problems in the bathroom, and you start to look at, and it just kind of starts to separate. The choice I made is really much better than these other options. Okay, continuing with this cognitive dissonance, Josh. Let's look at the insufficient justification effect. And this comes from a very classic study from Festinger and Carl Smith in 1959. And what participants in the study did was they had to perform an extremely boring task. It was like really monotonous, and they had to do it for a long time. Like it must have been. It would have been horrible to be a subject. Like it's like you're moving pegs around in this board, and like it's not like you have to use strategy or anything. You just gotta keep doing the task, and you're being watched the whole time. And anyways, so you do this boring task, and at the end of it, the experimenter says to you, "Oh, you know what? Um, I'm wondering if you could help me out. There's another condition to this experiment where subjects are talked to beforehand and they're told how enjoyable this task is, and my research assistant hasn't shown up and I can't do it myself. Would you be willing to go and talk to the next subject and tell them how enjoyable and fulfilling this task is, and I can pay you for it." Some of the subjects were offered $20, which in today's money that would be like about $150. And so it was it's good money for if somebody offered me $150. Sure, I'd go lie to the next participant and say it's a really interesting task. Other subjects were only offered $1. They said, he said, this is all I can pay, all I'm allowed to pay you. But he's really convincing, like, just help me out. I know it's not a lot of money, but help me out. And so the majority of subjects agreed, and then they had to actually talk to the next subject, who was really just part of the experimental team, but they didn't know this. So they had to go out and say, this was a great task. It's very fulfilling and zen-like. It was like, you'll enjoy it. And anyways, and this was meant to cause cognitive dissonance. You just done a task that was really boring. Like, it was really monotonous. And now here you are, lying to somebody. And most of us believe that lying's bad, and we don't purposely go around lying to people. And so this is where the dissonance would happen. Your behavior is that you're saying one thing, but your actual attitude is a different thing. Anyways, let's look at the results. The result. One final bit. After somewhat later, they had the subjects rate how enjoyable the task was, and this is the important part. So there were some subjects who did not lie at all. They did not have to talk to another subject coming in, and you can see that they gave it a negative score. As far as it was not enjoyable at all. And the ones that got paid $20 to lie, they moved a little bit towards in the positive direction compared to the control group, but still they were on the negative side of the ratings. But look at this: the ones that were paid $1 to lie gave a much more positive evaluation of the task. And this was the real finding. Like, if I typically when I ask class who's going to rate the task as more enjoyable, if the people paid $20 or people paid $1 to lie, well, usually people think, well, the ones that were paid $20 will say that will rate the task as more enjoyable. But you get this opposite result, and this is because of cognitive dissonance. Let's just look at what this is here. Participants who were paid only $1 to mislead another participant experienced the effect of insufficient justification, which is a form of cognitive dissonance. This dissonance led them to have more positive attitudes about the task. So getting paid $20 justified the lie to the subjects in the $20 condition. So they didn't have the same dissonance, because it's like, yeah, sure, I lied, but there's a really good reason for it. I received, a good sum of money. But in the $1 task, you don't have that justification of why you lied to somebody. So in order to reduce the cognitive dissonance they were feeling, once again, you remember, you can't change a behavior. Well, they can't change that they lied to a subject. What they can change is their attitude about the task. And this is what happens, because if the task is somewhat enjoyable, then they didn't really lie. So this is a way that they reduce their cognitive dissonance, this anxiety in their minds, is that I didn't really lie. The task was kind of okay. It was kind of enjoyable and peaceful task to move these pegs around, and this is what we call the insufficient justification effect. The getting paid $1 is insufficient justification to lie, and so you have to change your attitude. Getting paid $20 is justification for your lie, and so you don't have to change your attitude. You still consider the task boring. Okay, that's the one. That experiment's also talked about in that video I mentioned, so make sure you do watch it. Finally, justification of effort helps to explain why people are willing to subject themselves to humiliating experiences such as hazing, because if it takes a lot of effort to join a group, then it makes the group seem that much more valuable. So if all you had to do is to, let's say to join a fraternity or something, if there was no hazing, all you had to do is sign a list and then you're in. And you might not really think highly of the fraternity. You might be like, maybe I'll participate, maybe I won't. Like it just doesn't seem that valuable. But if you have to jump through a bunch of hoops or experience hazing in this case, like and subject yourself to humiliating experiences, then it's like, well, why did I do all that? Oh, because it's so valuable. So the value of the organization you're joining increases the harder it is to get into it. And that's why like exclusive clubs like seem really valuable, because it costs a lot of money to get into them, or you have to meet certain conditions. And once people join cults and things like that, like they move to live with the cult members, like that's a lot of effort. So they end up valuing the cult more because they had to do a lot to get into it. Anyways, well, this picture here is just a couple of parents grieving their son's death, which resulted from a hazing incident during a fraternity party. Um, this is why hazing is very much discouraged by university administrators as well as psychologists, because it can often go too far. Let's look at persuasion as our final major topic in this learning objective. We can define it as the active and conscious effort to change an attitude through the transmission of a message. Three factors affect persuasiveness. First of all, the source, who is delivering the message. So things like attractiveness come into play. Like we're more willing to listen to somebody that we consider attractive, or credibility. Like if I'm receiving information about medical products, like I'm going to believe a doctor more than just a salesman, for instance. Similarity to you, we tend to be more persuaded by people that are like us. Okay, second factor is the content and what the message actually says. And certainly, like stronger arguments that appeal to emotions, they tend to be the most persuasive. But also, there's other factors like how often you hear the message. Remember the mere exposure effect of just hearing a message more and more often might, you know, make it seem more persuasive. And then finally, there's the factor of the receiver, who's the one receiving the message, and characteristics of the receiver will make the message either more or less persuasive. So, is which way is the receiver leaning at the start? Like, if the receiver is already kind of on the side of the source, the person delivering the message, then they're more likely to be persuaded, if compared to if they were originally opposed to what the message is, or opposed to the source. Is the person more gullible or not? Is going to affect the persuasiveness. And then just there's a whole bunch of sociological type factors, like age makes a difference of the person receiving the message, gender for some things, um, socioeconomic status, and things like that. Characteristics of the person that's receiving the message will affect how persuasive it is. One model that was put forth is called the elaboration likelihood model, in which says that there are two pathways to persuading others. The central route is a method of persuasion that uses high elaboration. People pay attention to the arguments, consider all the information in the message. And this method usually results in the development of stronger attitudes. So this is about, the content of the message, the arguments that are put forth. And On the other hand, we have the peripheral route. It's a method of persuasion that uses low elaboration. People minimally process the message. This method usually results in the development of weaker attitudes. This is more like, like, oh, the person was really attractive, and that's why I listened to them. Like, the attractiveness of the speaker has nothing to do with the message, um, and yet maybe that's why we listen to it. Or it's smoke and mirrors, like, or like, it's why at a political rally they'll try to have famous people come up to the stage, or they'll have a band that plays, a famous band that plays, before the politician comes up, because none of these things has to do with the message that person putting forth, but they are all part of the peripheral route. It's like, this is why, like, politicians might kiss a baby, because it has nothing to do with their platform or what they stand for, but it's good PR, and so anything that's just, isn't really part of the central message is the peripheral route. It's, streamers and balloons and music. Okay, that's cool. That's why, or like, like we looked at earlier, advertisers using celebrities is to reach you on a peripheral route. Continue with this model. When you are motivated because the decision is important to you and you have the time to consider information, you will tend to process the information via the central route, meaning that you'll consider the merits of the argument. You do careful processing of the information, and as a result, your attitude changes will reflect what they call high elaboration, means that you put a lot of thought into it, and these attitude changes will tend to be stronger and longer lasting. You really, considered the message, and thought about the pros and cons and whatnot. When you are either not motivated or not able to consider information, maybe you're in a real hurry to make a decision, you process the information via the peripheral route. So things like attractiveness of the speaker, or being whether it's a famous person or not, or how often you hear the message, these kind of things might come into play. And as a result, your attitude change reflects low elaboration because careful processing does not occur. These attitudes will tend to be weaker and shorter lived compared to the central route attitudes. But I already mentioned politicians. Remember, politicians don't have to convince you for years to come. They're just trying to convince you of that to vote for them during the next election. So it doesn't have to be a long lasting attitude. It can just be that they've convinced you for long enough that you'll vote for them during the next election. Just to give you one quick example, and I was thinking about um, my own life, and like whenever I buy a new computer or a new laptop or whatever, I do days of research. I it's important for me to have a good laptop. I completely use the central route. I do a whole bunch of research online. I make charts. It's ridiculous, dude. I'll have charts with all sorts of stars all over the place, and 30 different brands of computers I'm considering, and anyways, I do tons of research, and but I always believe in my choice when I finally make it, and so I end up with a strong attitude. But let's say I need to get a computer in the like today. My computer is broke. I need one for tonight. I mean, I might run out to Walmart and just see whatever they have there, and then like you know, and I've done no research, and this would be a peripheral. So maybe I buy one because they have a sale sign on it. Oh, there's $20 off. That would be a peripheral decision, or maybe one says top seller, and that's the reason I buy that one. Or I just like the look of one, or some other kind of surface feature. And sometimes for a lot of things in life we use the peripheral route. We make choices just based on how something looks, or whether it's on sale, or because we know our friend, or my friend's got that model, so I'm going to get that one. And we don't do careful processing. But typically, if a decision is really important to us, or if it's a huge life changing kind of decision, like which college to go to, or buying a house or a car or something like that, we tend to use the central route, and we tend to try to make a really informed decision. And that will conclude learning objective 3.